Hi, welcome back, all you cool cats. Again, thank you for joining us this week. It looks like we are making books for both Isabelle and Galaxy. This one that you're seeing on screen right now is Isabelle's, and we did work on, we dyed the paper, we did all of the binding ourselves, and we even put the cover on, and we'll show you how to do that. This one here is Galaxy's. It's not just a spell book for her, it is also her pack rules. It's been passed down generation to generation. You can see at the end there, we did a headband and a tailband on hers of red and white, just giving her a little bit of extra protection on her ends. Some of her papers are ripped because it has been passed down for generations. This one, we started with measuring out how long the paper was and figuring out the halfway point, because Rosalind didn't want her book nearly as big as a normal size book. So have had this tool forever, and I could not tell you where I got it, but we set it up and we started to cut all the paper, and you'll see me do it and then Rosalind do it after. And simply we just ran the blade, which is the green knob on this page, along it. On this device, we just ran that along the edge and cut it in half, and this paper was cut in half at 7 inches. It's a legal rule paper. We did at one point have a little bit of trouble getting through all the pages, so as we progressed, we shrunk down how many pages at a time we cut, and Rosalind, having almost no upper body strength, did need my help to cut the pages. And those pages that just got messed up, we kind of just threw them to the side, and they were pages that getting withdrawn later. now that all the paper was cut, we set the oven to the lowest possible temperature that we could, which on our oven was 170 degrees, and we started making coffee. We turned on our Instapot, having it full, and then filled up the coffee with 2 tablespoons of this is creme brulee coffee. And we are using French press because that is what I like to use. It just tastes better from the coffee, even though we do have it's 3 tablespoons of coffee, not 2. And the Instapot clicks off. There it goes. And we just fill up the French press to, I believe we did it right below or right above the golden or the silver medal. We let it sit for about 5 to 7 minutes, and after 5 or 7 minutes we pushed it down. And mind you, it was still steaming, so it's not going to cool down quickly. It's just like any regular coffee. And you do have to do a French press slowly so it does get all of the particles of coffee out. And we dumped it into a baking sheet or a baking tray. And what we're going to do next is check the pH level of it. Now, typically, coffee is a little bit acidic. We found out that this coffee, or it's either this coffee or it being done in a French press made it to be the perfect level, which is right around 7 on the pH scale, so that it's close to water, as we can see. And we did check it a couple times just to make sure that that was the right level it was at. Next, we just placed a few pieces of paper inside the coffee and made sure that it was completely covered, and making sure all the paper is covered with coffee. We let it sit. She didn't want her paper too terribly dark, so we only let it sit for the amount of time it would take for it to dry in the oven, which we figured out would be about 13 minutes at that time. You can let it sit longer or shorter, depending on how dark you want your paper to be. And when she put it in the oven, we put more paper into the coffee, making sure it was all covered. So we let those papers sit while the other ones dried in the oven. And it took about 13 minutes in our oven to get those finished. I would just keep an eye on them. And then we just lay them out, make sure that they're not overlapping or anything. And if it's not nice and flat, that's fine. It'll add a little bit of extra color in those areas where the pages are bent over. Next step, going in. We did let them do it all on their own. And this is where Raven was doing hers. She wanted a little bit higher paper, or a little bit of a bigger book, so her paper's a little bit bigger. And it took a little bit longer to dry in the oven. We did a lot of hers by air drying. And hers we had to keep a really close eye on as they were coming in and out. And like I said, you really don't have to make sure it's all flat. Now, here's where we are making signatures of the book. A signature is a set of paper, a section of the book where they're all folded together. So a single page, like I'm demonstrating to Rosalind and Raven right here, that is called a folio. Folio is just one single page folded in half, and that's it. I took a pencil and just kind of ran it along the edge. Rosalind found her own way of doing that. I typically just take my nails and crease that fold really well. And make sure your corners are lined up so that everything is nice and even, and make sure so the edge is nice and squared off. And make sure you crease that fold. Now, this is the start of the signature where you're putting folios together. We did folios of 10 on their books because they have relatively thin paper. If you're going to use thicker paper, you will probably want to do it with less pages in a signature. Rosalind had 7 signatures in her book, so that's 70 pages, and Raven had 50, or 5 signatures, so she had 50 pages or 50 folios. I'm just showing you. I did speed up the video a little bit so you can see approximately how long it took. It didn't take us very long since both of us were working on folding it. We did have a little bit of trouble every once in a while making sure the edges lined up because we cut the paper ourselves. And we just put the new folded sheet on the outside of the previous ones till we had 10 pages in the signature. And that was the last of that signature. And we just pressed down the end to make sure it was really nice and set, and we let it press overnight. We also, like I said, did 10 folios and 1 signature for Raven as well. This is me going back through the process with her. Now, every once in a while, Raven put her paper in a little bit longer in the oven, so it was a little bit harder to get folded correctly. So, just make sure you keep an eye on the time in the oven so you don't overbake your paper. And that can cause a fire, so be very careful, please. And Raven, you see how Raven uses her fingernails to crease it as well. And we just folded all the paper. After all the signatures are folded, or the folios are folded and separated into signatures, we are going to measure out the length of the page and set up where we are going to want our stitches. I'm going to find the center of the page, so that's going to be, you're going to want 2 equal distance from the center of the page for the middle of the book to keep that together. And then you're going to want 2 at the ends of the book, about ½ an inch away from the end of the book, and then maybe ¼ inch away from each other. And each side is going to be like that. And after that, we did let this paper sit overnight to kind of flatten it a little bit more, so it's a little bit easier to work with. We're going to make sure the edges are lined up, and having either book press or having someone out to help you works. But you're going to hold it down, and then you're going to make a mark at each of those spots for the top that you made on the top signature. You're going to make it all the way across, all the way up them all. You're going to do it through for each mark. Just make sure you hold everything steady as you're making these marks, so nothing gets crooked or anything. After each, and this is just me doing the same thing on Raven's book. I did it in centimeters. I think I did a centimeter from the edge and then a ½ a centimeter away from that. And that's what it looks like, at least. I'm sorry, ignore the camera moving. Gideon had gotten a hold of the stand. I just marked the center spot I could get, and I did that one about a centimeter apart from each other. And then again, I just quickly made the lines from top to bottom on each of the signatures. And I did not have help for this one. Everyone had gone out and I was working on this. But I did get it marked, and they got put together really well, I think. So after you have the holes marked, what you're going to do is you're going to take an awl or something that you can stab into it. You could always take a X-Acto knife and use that to cut down the edges as they're folded. I did have a little bit of trouble with this, and as you'll see a little bit later, but you just want to make sure that they're poked all the way through. You can go through each signature and make sure that the holes for the stitches are poked. So after you get each of the holes poked, you're going to take a really long piece of thread and needle and thread the needle, tie the two ends together, and you're going to go into, the way I did Rosalind's was I went into the first hole and out the second, and into the third, out the fourth. Well, so into as in you're working from the outside in and out inside out. So I went in the first, out the second, in the third, out the fourth, in the fifth, out the sixth, and I added a new signature after that. And having thread that long, you will have to, well, I had to deal with a few knots that formed, but they were pretty easy to get out. So to attach the second signature, I went back into the first signature and out the second hole. I can't tell you how I did that because I don't remember, but I went in diagonally into the first hole, and out the second hole after looping, or I went into the second hole and out the first hole, looped it around the stitch I had made through the first two holes, the last two holes of the signature before, and then went into the second hole, went out the third hole, looped the thread, as you'll see here in just a moment, pulling that tight. Then I'm going to loop the thread through the stitch below it, and then put the needle back through the next hole, making sure everything is pulled tight all the way through. And I'll continue that way till we get to the last signature. For each of the books, I did almost the exact same thing, going in one hole, out the other, and the next, out the one after that, in the second to last, and out the last. And then I just kept repeating that process until you're done with all the signatures, which at that point you have a completed text block. So after the text block is done, I forgot to record us gluing the edges. We just put a little hodgepodge along the spine of the book, and then we put a piece of muslin along the spine just to kind of help keep it safe and secure. Here, what I'm doing is I'm cutting a piece of paper and getting it set up so that it will be the what is yeah, they're called end papers. They get glued to the first page and the last page, and then after you get the cover on, they get glued to the cover. And this is just me making sure we have 2 pages so that one can be on each side. Folding in half, getting them prepped to be glued on. And here's where I take the piece of muslin and get it set up to be glued onto the spine. And as you can tell, we're probably using scraps. So if you have a piece of scrap fabric that is just a cotton piece of fabric, you just square it up and use that. It does not have to be muslin. And the girls wanted a bookmark. So what we did was we had a piece of we have this really pretty golden ribbon that we ended up using, and that you can see right there. We measured it to be a little bit longer than the actual book itself, so that it could be glued to the spine underneath the fabric and be able to go through the whole book. What I did here was I just put the edge that was going to be out into a little bit of fire so it didn't fray. The spine had already been glued once, so I just found the center of the book, put the ribbon through, and put a little bit of glue on. Right here we're using a popsicle stick because I just didn't want to find the brush, but it worked. You can't really see it, but what I'm doing right now is I'm just kind of spreading the glue over the spine so I can put the muslin on, or the fabric on, and get it so that the spine could set up. I made sure that it was from one end of the spine to the other, and so it was really secure. after we got the spine fabric glued on, I just put glue on one side of the paper so that we could get it glued to the outside pages of the text block. Make sure all the corners are sticking and it's evened up very nicely. And this page seemed to be giving me a little bit of trouble. And just repeat the process on the other side. And after all that's glued up, find something heavy to press the book with overnight, or at least until it dries. While it was drying, we cut up some cardboard. This was a box for Walmart delivery. I put Rosalind wanted to design her own cover, so I cut out a piece of muslin for her, and she just colored it with Sharpie. Right here, I'm putting glue on the spine so that we can start getting the book put fully together. I just realized that it probably wasn't the best idea to start with the spine, but you know, we live and we learn. So the best way to do it is you start with the covers, figure out where the spine is going to be, and glue one of the covers together. So right here, I'm letting Rosalind put the glue on, and you do need to make sure the glue is relatively thick because it will dry pretty quickly, but you don't want to damage your spine by tapping it like she was. And just make sure the whole piece of cardboard is covered with the glue. And then you're going to open it up and get it stuck down where you need it to be. You're going to just pull it tight over the edge of the book and press it down. And then do the second cover, or the second piece of cardboard. And I'm just kind of holding it down so it would stick a little bit. Open up the other end of the book and get that glued down. Make sure it's pulled really tight and the fabric is pressed down onto the cardboard really well. And this is where I figured out that it was better to do the cardboard first rather than the spine. Here what I'm doing is I'm putting the glue along the edges of the cardboard so that we can get the fabric folded over. And the best way to do this, and as I learned actually in the process of making Raven's book, was if you cut the corners off at a diagonal and pull them up over and then do the side edges, it will make much neater looking corners. But if you also do it the way I did it and clip the edges, it will work as well. And from there, what we did was we did the other side. And at that point, when I realized the spine hadn't stuck, I just pulled the text block out and got it completely glued together. So we glued down the edge of the spine so that you didn't have raw fabric on that edge, but you had something that with a nice fold. And we just got it completely glued together like it needed to be. And all the fabric glued on. Make sure you get the edges of the cardboard as well. And you don't have to use cardboard. You could use a piece of plywood where it's a little bit thicker and it's going to hold together a little bit longer, but we didn't have any on hand, and cardboard works pretty well. Now that everything is glued pretty well, what we just did was we glued down the center again, this time making sure there was a lot of glue, and we glued one side of the case. Made sure there was a lot of glue on there so we didn't have any problems with it sticking. And we made sure that the text block was lined up correctly, and we pulled down the end page so that it covered the cardboard that was there. And then we just repeated the process on the back cover. And then we just closed it up, pressed it down so it was completely stuck through, and we just set it under something heavy so it was set for the night. Now both of the girls wanted almost like a pendant on the front of the book, so what we did was take another piece of cardboard and just cut out the shape that they wanted. So Rosalind's was a square because she decided that she wanted to draw a picture on her medallion, so we took the square and cut it out with a X-Acto knife, well, more of a rectangle. And after that, we just got a big piece of muslin and found a piece that would be able to cover it. Now, what I did was just glue it onto the muslin like I had with the cover. And then I had made a stencil for the picture she wanted, and I'm trimming the edges, but I'm not pulling them over first. So after I trimmed the corners and folded everything up, what we did was use the stencil I made for Rosalind, and she decorated it with Sharpie, and we just glued it onto the front. It was pretty simple. Well, thank you for joining us, all you cool cats. Come back next week. We are going to, come back next week. We are planning on sitting down with each of the girls and discussing what they plan on having their character wear. It's going to be a video with my mom, and she's going to hopefully get that done soon. So, see you guys next week. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and comment down below if you have any comments or suggestions that would help us. You want to say bye? Say bye!